Welcome to Season 6 of Purposeful Empathy, a show dedicated to amplifying the voices of people from across the globe who believe the world needs more empathy and are doing something about it. Today's episode is brought to you by Grand Huron International, an on-demand coaching provider for individuals and companies. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the show. So welcome to a new episode of Purposeful Empathy. Today I'm joined by the fabulous Heather Hiscox, who is on a mission to change the way we change the world. And she does that in two ways. First, she's the founder and CEO of P.A.U.S.E for Change. The P.A.U.S E, P-A-U-S-E method is a proprietary framework that helps changemakers address difficult challenges and pursue promising opportunities. With skills centered in empathy, equity, and experimentation, organizations can be certain of which solutions will work and why, using fewer resources in less time while achieving greater impact. Now, that's a promise I want to unpack. Heather is also the co-creator of Possibility Project, which is an online conversation series and growing community of disruptive changemakers reclaiming their power through meaningful sparks, connection, and action. Welcome, Heather.
Hello. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm so happy to see you again. You were a guest speaker in my social entrepreneurship class, and you really kind of are, for me, like the full circle kind of conversation, because I don't know if you know this, but the reason I fell onto empathy in the first place was through my PhD, that I was interviewing social entrepreneurs to understand why they do the work they do. And they all kind of talked about this like compelling need to act on empathy for others. And so even though my research now is kind of looking at, you know, empathy and neuroscience and social work and neurobiology, like all these different spaces, you really are, I guess, exemplified like bullseye. How do we leverage empathy for social change? So welcome.
Yes, that's great. Thank you so much for having me.
I want to start with a question about problem solving. So you talk about status quo problem solving skills. And what do you mean by that?
Yeah, there's this strange thing that the social sector has adopted, and it just keeps supporting these status quo skills of how, when we see a problem, like maybe a program's not working, or we have employee retention or recruitment challenges, or there's a disruption in our work or in our communities, and we want to respond, we want to be active, coming up with solutions. There's just this idea that we should just sit in a boardroom with people that look just like us, and we shouldn't talk to anybody else, and we should just like dream up what we should do, and then we should just go build it. And then in that process, we should get grant funding, and then we should like get donor support and design all the brochures and just put together this whole project plan so that feeling of planning is very soothing, and it reduces that anxiety that's caused by uncertainty. But it's highly ineffective and extremely wasteful and produces weak impact. And if we really sit and think about it, and I have this visual that I use that really shows like all the activity and time and energy and resources that are potentially wasted, it doesn't make a lot of sense that we wait till the end to engage our stakeholders in sort of a grand reveal. Doesn't make any sense. We need to engage stakeholders first, right? And have that empathetic connection. We need to test things before we build them, because we have these really tangled systems and hypotheses that we really need to tease out and identify those assumptions. So it's just my way of bringing out in the sector that it's sort of crazy making the way that we go about creating change, hoping for the best and hoping that our altruism will like carry us to great results, and then it doesn't.
So then I think that's probably where you came in with this P.A.U.S E framework, right? So I know these 5 letters come together in an acronym, and I think what we need to do is we really kind of like look at each one at a time. Would you do that for us?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, the P.A.U.S E framework was really born out of my own frustration. Total troublemaker, always like why do we do it this way? And what about this? And I heard about this, and we should try that. So always, being a pain and looking for something else. So really looking outside of the sector to see what was happening in different other sectors, to see what was really helpful for problem solving and community engagement and learning. And so it's really just like the best that I found across these different sectors. And and adapting it for social change and for social impact. And so P is package the challenge. It's all about getting aligned around the challenge and specific stakeholders. We can't serve everyone at once. We have to be very specific because there is no one size fits all solution. We have to really assess uncertainty. That's the A. We have to identify what we don't know and celebrate that and really set ourselves up for optimized learning. The U is understand stakeholders. That's where empathy reigns supreme, right? How do we really do fantastic listening and ask wonderful questions and really identify and control our own bias so it doesn't affect our listening and the key insights we're able to extract. And then how do we test solutions? Solution testing is the fourth part. How do we identify our embedded assumptions and how do we design behavioral experiments with our stakeholders to really see if and how our potential solution will create value? And then last step is really connecting to decision makers. It's evidence-informed decision making. How do we share power? How do we have different conversations with decision makers that are led by evidence, that really show the data and the insights that should inform next steps versus like pet projects or best guesses? And that's really what drives the work that I do, is helping organizations, nonprofits, local governments, and philanthropic foundations use the framework to address their challenges and opportunities.
Okay, so now we kind of understand that at 64,000 feet up, but could you share an example or a few examples that actually bring those letters to life?
Yeah. It's my favorite thing to tell clients, which is super scary as a consultant, is the first thing I say is, I don't have the answer because I'm not your stakeholder, but I have the skills to help you understand, where to go. And so many of the projects are very winding and they end up in unexpected places. So I can give you just examples of some of the projects. Some nonprofits, for example, they wanted to engage more families in their parenting programming because their numbers were just slipping. And one of the big ahas that they had was that they were asking people to imagine results based on a brochure and like a tabling event, a table with a little skirt and some little giveaways. They were supposed to imagine how this would impact their child's development and their family's, growth and connection. So they learned some really simple things that they could do to meet parents in their like natural environments, like at grocery stores or fast food places, or at those tabling events, provide really interactive displays where they could get immediate value. And so they were able to test all of those and really integrate it into their recruitment and outreach strategies, which is transformative. Or a university realizing that students that were leaving their programs, when they did their interviews, every single student said, "Can I come back? Can I re-enroll?" And it was for adult basic education, getting their GEDs. And what they learned was that the students, again, couldn't imagine the future. So they had to put together 4 different vignettes that showed examples of how different students were successful in completing their studies, even if it included some students having to withdraw and return. And they didn't know that that was a possibility. They just had no idea. It helped philanthropists test drive potential solutions with nonprofits, giving them the capacity building support to test drive ideas has been another use case. And then a lot with local governments around what policies should they enact or not. What employee engagement strategies should they activate? As tension-filled challenges like community policing and how to reimagine community and police connection, to working with a group right now of how to reimagine their contracting process. So it could be less sexy, but equally impactful.
So do you have memories of like being in a space with people as they're like answering some questions to bring insight, where you've been like moved by what you've seen or that it's just memorable for some reason?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, one of my favorite examples is it was with a local government, and looking at the data, they had made a very clear case that there had been an increase in crime in this one area. And so the team, which was, half law enforcement, half other employees and community folks, they had formed a team that were going to go focus on crime to really understand the community's perspective. And looking at what they presented to me, it made logical sense. I thought, okay, this is an interesting challenge. Let's go. Every single resident that we interviewed and talked to, just to do the initial outreach, some of them said, yeah, I guess crime is, increase, I guess, but I feel pretty safe overall. And usually that was attributed to the long-lasting experience they had living in those neighborhoods and the relationships they had with neighbors. But every single person talked about affordable housing. They said, oh, you're here to talk about crime? Well, yeah, I guess. But what I really want to talk to you about is housing, because they were saying, my rent is increasing 30% a year. My landlord is non-existent and non-communicative and non-responsive. I have rats and cockroaches. It's awful. I will be homeless if this keeps going in this way. You need to take action as a city and you have to help us. And, here's these law enforcement officers and other people that are showing up to fight crime. And they're like, okay. And I was so inspired by the pivot. They fully listened. They heard the pain. They heard the facts. They heard all of it. And they came back and said, all right, we're going to focus on housing. And they were so nervous about the whole thing, but they had to go back and do brand new interviews. They had to identify all the stuff they didn't know about housing. They had to try to use their own website and see what a hot mess it was. They had to understand that the housing brochures and benefits programs they offered were completely useless for people in these income brackets. And they really understood the dynamics and the issues, and they were fully committed to making change. And they came up with some really great solutions. So it was very inspiring to see how they were able to put aside their hope of what they would create and really listen and respond.
So tell me how your P.A.U.S.E framework is either within the general umbrella of design thinking or human-centered design, or how it's different. Because it sounds to me like there's a lot of alignment.
Definitely, there's a lot of alignment. Design thinking and human-centered design wasn't created for social change and social impact. So I think I spent a lot of time learning about the models and then identifying the deficits and the ways that there could be, some sprucing up and some interweaving of social justice, language and messaging, and focus on harm, focus on power. Focus on, different forms of community engagement. And so I just found areas where there needed to be more. And even with prototyping is powerful because it is a way to test. But I love the lean startup methodology of the behavioral experiments, because I've seen so many people, promise and say really lovely things. And then when you go back to them and you need them to take action, they're nowhere to be found. And solutions just are not viable, obviously. And it's a huge indicator that solution is not even valuable enough for them to invest a minute amount of resources. So it's definitely connected to those methodologies, but it's been unpacked and sort of filled with some of those gaps.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I always tell the story in my class about a group in Kenya that had lost a few girls to prostitution because they needed income for their family. And a New York socialite and some friends gathered in a living room and started brainstorming solutions until one of them said, I think we have no idea about their context. So I think maybe we should really speak to the community that is impacted and find out what they think. And it turns out that the community said, we just need some wood. That's what we need to solve our problem. And they're like, you need some wood? And they're like, yeah, because then we can build fences around our maize fields, and then the animals won't eat our food, and then our daughters don't have to go sell their bodies. And it was just one of those stark examples of really understanding at a local level, up close, the proximity issue, that when you're working with people to solve a problem, that you really need to speak to the people who are having the problem, because there's so much insight to be gleaned from that. So that's, I guess, for me, where I think empathy is about listening. So I wonder if you could speak to that for a sec.
Yeah. I think, empathy is infused absolutely in all parts of the framework. I always say that the 3 pillars are empathy, equity, and experimentation. But there needs to be empathy even at that challenge stage. Who says it's a challenge? And, empathy is so connected to equity of who has access, who is listening, who's not listening, who decides not to listen, and that's okay, right? Like, what are the dynamics with leaders, and who gets access to sharing feedback? So that's usually a big piece of what I have to unpack. And it works from both directions, right? So if you have hierarchical, lower staff, more frontline staff, they really need to understand, what the daily living experience is of decision makers, and then vice versa. I mean, decision makers should not be activating, new initiatives, projects without really talking to everyone. And then, of course, engaging with stakeholders. And what I think is really challenging in social impact is so many people treat it as like a quick little checkbox. Like, oh, I talked to 5 people, I got a sense of it, I'm moving on. Mm-hmm. Like, that's not enough. And we really have to go deep. And what I really focus on is, even before you get to the interview stage, you really have to understand the role of bias. And you really have to understand the power of listening, because most people think they're pretty good listeners. And then when they practice it and they go through some of these activities, they're like, oh man, yeah, I really need to work on it, because we all do, right? And then with the experimentation, it's so funny how also people think like, okay, I did a good job. I did a better job with my interviews, with my empathy work. And now I'm getting to testing and we'll keep moving. It's like, no, you're still listening, because you're still getting to why. That's the ultimate understanding, right? Of like why people do what they do. And that's to your example that you just shared. We have to understand people's decisions without judgment, without bias, and to understand how people are currently trying to solve problems and what works and what doesn't, because we need to meet everyone where they are and then come up with those solutions that are, again, empathetically adopted, and that communication is still there.
Today's episode was brought to you by Grand Huron International, an on-demand coaching provider for individuals and companies. I imagine that you must get a lot of joy from, seeing people step into their agency and find innovative solutions and run with it, right? Like, there's got to be a lot of joy. I also imagine, and maybe this is just projection, but like that you see this systemic issues that kind of make the problem appear in the first place. And so how do you kind of navigate like the joy factor with the, like, why does this have to be this way in the first place? And how do you keep your optimism as a change maker yourself?
That's a great question. Yeah, I was just talking about this with someone earlier today. Yes, it is very easy to have those days where I joke you want to sit under your desk and you just are repeating over and over like patriarchy, capitalism, racism, right? It's like so much. So yes, it is absolutely a real question of like, how am I making change? Am I making change? Am I helping people? Am I making things worse? Like, am I creating harm? So there's a lot of that awareness, that self-awareness and self-development that goes on continually. But I think also, and what I was speaking to earlier today is that, I don't know if it's being a consultant, for a decade now, but really identifying how I'm meeting people where they are. And so I might have a grand vision of change, but what's their vision of change? Like, I have a definition of success, but again, empathetically, what's their definition of success? Because I may be really disappointed in the movement that I see a team make, or a leader and how they adopt, a new thinking or new idea. And then to someone else, they may come to me and be like, wow, we've never seen anything like that. And then to me, I'm like, what? That's it? Like that? Okay. So that's what I've learned over time, is that big change is so variable. And Exactly. And so that is, I think, one way. Who knows if it's a rationalization, but it's one way that I feel good about the work, because it impacts every person in a different way and every organization in a different way.
Yeah, no, earlier, just in the earlier part of their answer to the question, you mentioned like these 3 big systems. You have patriarchy, racism, and capitalism. And I feel like the first 2, we kind of really understand as, problems for a lot of people, because there's the people who hold power and the people who don't. But especially in the States, my sense has been that capitalism has been still like championed. Do you feel like there are new discourses that are really kind of revisiting that? And like, yeah?
Oh, 100%. Yes. Yeah, there's I love all the conversations right now that are happening on reparations, that are around ways to have conversations around justice and money, and like, what do new economies look like? What are new models? And like the work of justice funders is really inspiring, and Decolonizing Wealth project, really inspiring, and those leaders involved there just asking whole new questions. One of the topics we had on Possibility Project, which I'm sure I'll talk about in a little bit more, was really about, asking bold questions like, what if philanthropy ended? Like, philanthropy is highly problematic, but we've adopted it, and it's so tied to racism, patriarchy, capitalism, but it's just what we know. And so there are amazing leading edge thinkers in social impact space right now that are so inspiring, that are really asking the whole question of like, what if we tore it down? What if we reimagine? What would a whole new fresh start look like in this day and age if we started from scratch? And so that's really inspiring. And what I also love about those leaders is that they are so connected to the work that they're also able to hold tension of still operating in this space, and loving it, and loving the people that fill it, and hating it and wanting to rip it apart. And so I think that that's an element. There's a lot of inspiration, but a lot of tension holding, which is really great.
COVID is only kind of like exacerbated or brought even further to the fore. So tell us about the Possibility Project, and what was the backstory, and what are you trying to do? What's the mission, vision there?
Yeah. Possibility Project really started, my co-creator, Devin Davey, who's out of San Francisco. She and I were, when COVID hit, were having great conversations, just the two of us, and with people in our network. And it was really giving us hope, because we noticed as a sector, we were seeing these signals that we had never really seen before. And as being troublemakers and, big question askers, these were normally conversations we were having like in dark corners at cafes, after we had sort of looked around stealthily, and we were noticing, like white supremacy is on a headline on a paper, and, these more typical and stodgy sort of standard social impact pillars were having these conversations, and we thought, okay, like this is the moment. We should do something to leverage this. So we wanted to really have these more, quiet conversations at scale, because we knew there were more and more people like us in our network and outside of our network that were hungry for these types of conversations in this type of community. So it was really just self-serving and wonderful for us in the beginning. And then it turned out we were right. There are a lot of people that want to do this. And so we are on our 28th episode that we have tomorrow. And we have, thousands of people that are tuning in and watching online. And we have this whole LinkedIn group of about 750 people that are engaged and want to have these conversations. So what we do is we host conversations about twice a month with a panel of either 2 to 3 people. And what's really unique about it is it's casual in that we only ask 2 questions. And we ask the speakers to just show up in the fullness of who they are, and they talk about what's dysfunctional that they want to disappear around the topic, and what's emerging that gives them hope. And very simple. And those are the questions on every episode. And then there's also time not only to hear from our speakers, but for the community to ask questions and to go into breakout rooms and join community with others. And, the chat is very alive and the community is very active. And our speakers really love it because it's a whole new experience. It's very authentic and connected to their purpose and the disruptive change they want to see. So it's just been such a gift to build that community and that platform.
That sounds amazing. I'm going to have to learn a little bit more about that and join a couple. They're all live. Is that it?
We do them live, and then the recordings are all on the website and on YouTube.
And where can we find them? On which website? Your website?
Yeah, it's just possibilityproject.org.
Beautiful. Last question. Well, actually 2 questions, if you'll indulge. What are your practices for self-empathy, self-care, self-compassion, just sort of filling your cup to make sure that you have the energy you need to go out in the world and continue doing the good work you do?
Oh, gosh. It's really about paying attention to myself and what I need. If I am just totally overwhelmed, I'm totally fine taking a break even in the middle of the day, and watching a little Netflix and just relaxing. So there's some of that, like just on a daily basis, listening to peaceful music while I'm working, just to kind of bring my energy down a bit. I'm a big nature girl. So typically on the weekends, we are paddleboarding, kayaking, hiking, just doing lots of different outside activities. So that is so restorative for me. I just feel so replenished after I spend time outdoors. And then with my family, excuse me, I have an amazing partner and two amazing kiddos. And so they, as much as I might be running around thinking I'm like going for total world domination, like creating everything that there needs to be, I'm just mom and people are hungry for dinner and like I have to go to this thing for school. And so they really help keep everything in perspective.
Well, we've never met in person, but I think this is probably the fourth time or fifth maybe that we've had a connection. And you consistently have a vibrational field around you that emanates like possibility, joy, optimism. So I just want to acknowledge that. Like you've got a very special kind of energy. It's contagious too. So last question, and this I love to ask of my guests, is can you think of a time when you were on the receiving end of empathy, purposeful empathy, so empathy on purpose, and what that meant for you?
For this one, I want to kind of shift it a little bit, if that's okay. And I want to share one of my favorite stories that solidified my absolute dedication to the practice of empathy and the power of empathy. And it really was a gift that someone gave to me in many ways. So I was working with a client, and there was a woman on the team that I was coaching, and she just seemed so just upset and disconnected and distracted. And I was, watching her body language and how she was interacting with the team. And I was just really disappointed in how she was showing up. And it was, creating some dynamics, but it was manageable. And I just thought, what the heck is up with this person? I'm creating an entire narrative for this person like we all do, right? Just jumping straight to assumptions. And so I decided my strategy would be to go next to her to the snack table during one of our breaks and just say like, hey, how you doing? I'm glad you're part of my team. How is everything? And she proceeded to tell me that was her first day back from maternity leave. And it was the first time she had ever left her small infant, her beautiful baby, in childcare. Her breast hurt because our process was so fast paced that she hadn't had time to go pump. She was worried about being embarrassed with leakage. She was exhausted, of course, because her baby was still only in the U.S., only like 12 weeks old, right? It just has a million things, but is also really excited to be back with her team that she's missed and wants to jump back into her professional life. And she has this great opportunity. And she's telling me this, and I just felt like, I can remember the moment of how that felt in my body, of how ashamed I was for making all of those assumptions. For me as a mom, knowing exactly what that feels like and how overwhelmed I felt, like I could deeply connect with what she was experiencing. It was just so powerful. And so from that point on, it really just reinforced for me that you never can know what's going on the inside from what you see on the outside. And it's usually an entirely unexpected narrative that is even more powerful than you could ever imagine. And that, who am I to make these judgments? And that it's my job and honor in my life to witness and to experience the stories of other people. And to really understand where I'm meeting them. Because when I was early in this work, I was so naive. I thought everybody was just as excited as I was to be there and to learn and totally disrupt all of their own mindsets and like ways that they do their work. And now it's just hilarious, right? But I really thought that in the early days. And so experiences like that amazing gift and many others, I just realized like we just have to see how people are at that moment, at that day. And then the learning journey is really hard. And it's just my job to help shepherd people through that journey.
That's why I think it's Gloria Steinem who said, empathy is the most radical emotion of all. If we deployed empathy to our full capacity, we could literally change the world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you for spending part of your afternoon with me, Heather. It was great to have you on the show. Thanks to everyone who was watching and listening. We'll see you next week at Purposeful Empathy.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
What if you had access to your own council of coaches to help you break free from your thinking clutter, make that important decision, and liberate you from whatever's holding you back? At Grand Huron International, you get to choose the coach of your choice anytime from anywhere. Visit grandhuroninternational.com and harness the power of on-demand coaching today.